Time to get smart about your contact center data. This is Conversational Intelligence by the numbers. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of By the Numbers. I'm Custage, Head of Research Insights here at Medallia, and I am really pumped to be joined today by Sid Banerjee, our Chief Strategy Officer here at Medallia. How's it going, Sid?
I'm doing well, Andrew. Thank you for having me on today.
So Sid, we're going to talk about something really interesting today, and I know it's a passion of yours, and this is the world of conversational intelligence. And we'll begin with our rundown to give you a little bit more information about this report. We recently surveyed over 500 professionals, 300 or so from the world of customer experience, and another 200 from the world of contact centers. We've got representation from the US and several other countries, from organizations spanning from $100 million in revenue all the way north of $25 billion, and also a variety of levels of seniority represented. So from that world of professionals, we have looked to understand a little bit more about the use of CI, the barriers to further use, and the benefits for those who are using it. But as we go into the data, let's first just define what we actually mean when we say conversational intelligence. Conversational intelligence is the use of AI to transform unstructured dialogue into structured data. And the data that we're talking about is what comes from conversations that are happening between customers and organizations through service channels like voice, chat, email, and others. It's really important when we talk about CI to think of it outside of the processing of text that comes from customer feedback surveys. We're talking about a completely different world here that's more from conversations and the interactions that brands are having with consumers every day. I think that prompts us so well to one of the first big findings of our report, which is this changing landscape of the need for more inputs beyond the survey. CX practitioners themselves, who for so long have been anchored around findings and action that comes from insights based on feedback surveys, are recognizing that they're limited. In their own view, maybe only as much as 40 or so % of the total insights that they could be collecting from their customers are from the world of surveys, and the rest they recognize are from channels that, if they're not using them, they're completely missing them. Does it surprise you that even CX practitioners themselves are recognizing that they may be heavily limited if they're relying only on surveys?
To be honest, in 2025, it does not. I think if we'd asked this question even as recently as 1 or 2 years ago, that number would be quite a bit higher in saying that they're getting insights from surveys. But in order to really run these programs well and to get the insights you need, it's important to look for insights from more than just surveys.
But also just the nature of what a survey can capture, I think, brings into question whether that's sufficient on its own anyway, even if response rates weren't a problem. And we're seeing that 3/4 of CX practitioners believe that the survey itself as a vehicle is insufficient.
When you analyze conversations at scale, you will pick up the customer telling you why they're calling. You will often, during the triage portion of a phone call, learn about the attempts that the customer took prior to actually making the phone call. So you'll get that journey insight. And you'll also pick up emotion, you'll pick up sentiment, you'll pick up markers of effort that are highly correlated to whether this customer is likely to remain loyal or remain, a happy customer doing business with the organization. All of that can be inferred from a conversation. And you get just so much more context, so much more journey insight, and frankly, a lot more predictive insight, because every customer that calls you can be analyzed, not just the 5 or 3 or 10% of the customers who fill out a survey after the call.
So there are customer experience professionals that are using CI today. And when we've asked them in their own words to describe some of the most common use cases, a few things have popped out, but I think they're not representative of everything that CI can do. But at least some of the things that are more commonly cited would be things like personalization and tailored recommendations. The other things are around issues and pain points identification. Also sentiment and intent analysis. A big thing around understanding how upset a customer actually is or what they might be likely to do. Gen AI also obviously a very big part of this too. So some of the actual dialogue itself, CI is showing itself in the form of chatbots and other types of agents that are interacting with the customer directly. And then number one on here that's cited is agent coaching. So Sid, I know you've seen a lot of use cases yourself. Could you talk a little bit around some of the benefits that come from this?
This is the power of CI. It's fixing the interaction in the moment, fixing the customer or making the customer have a better interaction so they're more likely to be loyal and ultimately be a promoter. And then ultimately fixing the experience more generally, whether it's a product or digital or even sales experience, so that the customer gets what they want. And ultimately that creates a higher quality, both revenue and cost efficiency outcome for the company.
But as far as what is being used, I think a very promising signal, at least at the moment, is that the recognition of value is already there. 90% of practitioners that are using CI already would consider it valuable or highly valuable, nearly half already putting it in that highest category.
What I've often found is that customers will start thinking, I just want to improve the quality of the interaction. And particularly because conversational intelligence is increasingly powered by large language model based AI solutions. I encourage any customer that's doing CI to start where they have the pain, but make sure that they don't limit themselves, right? That they evolve and expand the program over time, because that will create much more value, not just for the CX, but also for the company's financial and kind of economic incentives and outcomes.
Well, I think something that's really interesting too about this wide variety of use cases and how brands can fall on a continuum of maturity is the increasing recognition of the CX practitioner towards continuously proving value year over year.
I think the first wave of conversational intelligence was very much embraced by people in the contact center. But what you're finding now is that CX practitioners are realizing that those calls and chats and interactions are really, really important for just understanding customer experience from a CX perspective. And so most organizations will have, two different lenses on CI. One is, how do I use it to make the contact center better? And then the other is, how do I use it to just improve the customer experience more broadly across the enterprise? And that's where I think you get that amplification of value.
You talked a lot about this initial adoption of CI mainly being something driven by contact center leadership and not CX leadership. And it might not be a problem if information sharing was perfect within an organization, but what we're seeing is a lot of siloing that's holding teams back. You've got 4 in 5 CX practitioners that feel like their organization needs to do a better job sharing CI data between teams. Contact center practitioners agree with that too, maybe to a slightly lesser extent, but it's recognized as a problem. And where it seems to manifest itself is in what I think is one of the most interesting stats from our report, which is the level of adoption around an organization. You've got around a third of CX professionals that say that their teams are often using CI. You've got another quarter or so that say they're occasionally using it. But then of those that aren't using it at all, it's more likely that there is some CI capability in the organization, but it's just being used on other teams, namely the contact center, than it is likely that the organization is completely lacking all capabilities.
I am not surprised by these numbers. And frankly, this has been sort of what I've observed in the wild myself over the last year or so. Very quickly, the CX teams are saying, we need to see this information too, just like we needed to see all the surveys from everywhere in the business. And as companies start to realize the power of conversations across the business, they start to share. But I still think we're in the early innings of that transformation. What I think you'll find is that first, the data gets shared in an ad hoc fashion, meaning they just sort of share the conversations and people run them in different tools. Eventually, what you will find, just as you saw with Enterprise CX, is those conversations will be put into a shared infrastructure, a platform, frankly, like Medallia, where it can be accessed by anybody in the organization that has a need in a secure, governing, high governance and kind of high functionally useful way based on the personas and the needs of each stakeholder across the organization.
Is there anything about the culture or the leadership or the types of attributes that you think CX practitioners should emulate themselves in order to break down these silos better?
There's always a kind of a quid pro quo that can be offered here, where if you help the people owning the channel so that they can either serve more effectively or reduce demand, there's a benefit to everybody. And ultimately, you'll get more value as you bring that data across more parts of the organization.
So I love that from the perspective of the CX practitioner, and in many ways, it may be their biggest challenge to overcome is breaking down this silo. But by no means is it the case that the contact center is the perfect user of CI already today either, right? From our studies, at least, we've seen over several different capabilities that we've asked contact center leaders if they have within their organization that tie back to CI. There were 9 main ones that stood out, but The average contact center is only using about 4 out of 9 of these. What's your take on the state of the contact center and recognizing that there's still more work to do even for them to improve their CI capabilities?
A lot of people are using CI in what I would describe as an ad hoc way right now. You can always do ad hoc with a small central team, but to actually get full value from CI, you want to be building a more robust capability that uses these kind of feature extraction, metric calculation, and then prediction and even personalization recommendation capabilities in more enterprise grade way. Some companies will try to build it all, but again, I would caution that most companies should look at vendors that have actually created CI solutions that can cover all of these use cases, or at least bring together 2 or 3 companies that can do this together.
Now it's time to round it off. Sid, in our conversation, I think a couple things that stood out to me the most would be one, surveys are not enough, and CX practitioners themselves are recognizing that. Two, there is value being widely seen for those that are using conversational intelligence today. And the third is not enough are using it to its full extent. And the big barriers to overcome are information siloing between the contact center and customer experience teams, and also just the further rollout of more capabilities and putting CI into more channels. What stood out the most to you?
It's important if you're an organization to recognize CI is not going anywhere. In fact, if anything, it is the next big frontier, I think, for CX understanding and process improvement. And it's important for organizations to start where they can get the most benefit and bang for their buck, but also take a view of making sure that you share those insights across the enterprise and drive continuous improvement. That's ultimately where you're going to get the most impact from conversational intelligence going forward.
Well, once again, I really appreciate you joining us today. And for those of you watching, we do have the full report available in the link below. So please check it out when you have a chance. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going.
Thank you.